Hello, everyone. This is Sabrina Paganoni. I'm speaking from the HEALEY and AMG Center, and tonight I'm here with our patient navigation team, Alison Bulat and Catherine Small. Thank you so much for joining and giving everyone a few seconds to join from the waiting room. I see that people are joining, so perhaps we can start. And thank you again. As you know, the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial is a great collaborative effort. There are so many logos on the slide because many people contribute and support the trial from academia, industry, and the patient community. So thank you to all our supporters. If you can go to the next slide. And just to kind of go back to the goals of the trial. So really the goal of the trial is to screen drugs rapidly and efficiently. We want to get solid answers and determine the next steps. So we opened the trial in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. We've really been fortunate to work with so many of you from the patient community who, with great enrollment numbers. So we really thank you for making this trial possible under really unique circumstances with the pandemic. And so because of your efforts, we were able to rapidly enroll and really complete testing of the first 3 regimens that at least in the placebo-controlled period of the trial. Again, wonderful to see that we could test not 1, not 2, but 3 drugs sort of starting at the same time in 2020 with results in 2022, at least the top line results. And then we have at this point we have regimen D predominantly that's still ongoing. We don't have results for that yet, and regimen E Trialos is still enrolling new participants. As you know, after the placebo-controlled portion of each regimen, we have an open label extension. Next slide. So this just to go back to the central the core principles of the platform trial. The reason again we're doing the trial in a platform approach instead of doing separate trials, instead of doing standalone trials, is that by working together and using a shared infrastructure and a common protocol, we can gain operational and scientific efficiencies. So essentially, we were able to test these drugs more rapidly. Again, we tested a number of drugs over the course of the last couple of years, which obviously were special years with the pandemic, and we were able to do that more efficiently and also reducing the number of people on placebo. Next slide. Just to recap, every regimen includes about 160 participants randomized 3-to-1 active to placebo. So what that means is that for every regimen, and by regimen mean different drug that we're testing, most people go on active and only 1 out of 4 individuals or 25% goes on placebo. And after the placebo-controlled treatment period of 6 months, there is open label extension, which means that participants can receive active drug long-term. Next slide. This is what we're studying for each regimen. So we have a common protocol and common endpoints, as well as more individualized or customized endpoints for each regimen based on the mechanism of action and the science that supports that drug. So the primary endpoint is the change in disease severity through 24 weeks, measured by function or the ALS functional rating scale, accounting for mortality. And we also measure other important secondary endpoints, respiratory function and muscle strength, as well as survival, and obviously we monitor for safety. And if you can click one more time, this first set of results is what's shared in the initial top line results. However, in parallel, we're also collecting a number of biomarkers, for example, genetic information or neurofilament levels, as well as exploratory endpoints. We have 2 digital apps that are very helpful to monitor people in the home environment so that we can monitor their speech or voice. And specifically, we added the home spirometry, which is a way to monitor respiratory function in the home environment. We added, because of the pandemic, we were not originally going to do it, but now we're learning a lot about how to monitor respiratory function in the home environment. And to clarify, these biomarkers and exploratory endpoints, which are so important to help the entire field of ALS, there's a number of them. Actually, for every participant, we are collecting really a host of endpoints, which are incredibly important. So everyone who participated in the trial participated not only in the testing of one drug specifically, but also participated in expanding expanding knowledge about biomarkers, ALS science, genetics of ALS, etc. So again, lots of learnings for other, for other programs for ALS in general. To clarify, we do not have the results of those biomarkers and exploratory endpoints yet. They imply a lot of data, really an enormous amount of data that comes also from a number of different vendors, for example, labs that measure specific biomarkers, or other vendors that provide pieces to the puzzle. So again, what we have revealed so far relates to the top line results, which are essentially the primary endpoint, as well as key secondary endpoints and safety. Those are obviously important endpoints. That's why they are primary and secondary, but I also want to emphasize that we're still doing a lot more analysis on all regimens. Next slide. And again, this is a snapshot of the emerging biomarkers and outcome measures that we are analyzing. Again, the analysis for genetics, neurofilaments, other biomarkers, as well as the digital apps is in process. And again, they will be available in the coming months. I do want to mention that in addition to the ones listed on the slide, we are considering additional biomarkers and outcome measures for upcoming regimens. Specifically, I'm listing a couple that are important. ROTS is a way to self-assess function. So that's one thing that we're gonna include in upcoming regimens. And we're also working on adding PBMCs. PBMCs are essentially some blood cells that we can collect by doing a simple blood draw. And what's important about that is that we can then extract stem cells from individual participants and then make individualized motor neurons. We haven't done that due to operational complexity during the first few regimens, but we are planning on doing that for some of the upcoming regimens. So again, more to come in terms of biomarkers and other important science. Next slide. So again, this is a snapshot of the results of the first few regimens. We reported results sort of, in rapid succession in 2022. And I do want to say that what's important here is that the trial of each regimen gave clear answers and direction, and there was efficient execution. Specifically, regimen A was stopped early for futility, and while obviously that's not the outcome that we were hoping for, it is important to have early stopping rules in any trial so that we can be efficient with our resources and stop regimens that are unlikely to succeed. And we can stop them early and redirect efforts and participation to other programs. We also announced Regimen B results in September 2022, and those results again were that the drug tested in Regimen B did not meet the pre-specified primary or key secondary endpoints. Again, additional biomarker analyses are ongoing, as well as exploratory measures, subgroups, and other things that are important for ALS science, and we will reveal them in the coming months. There was also clear direction, and for this reason, we are stopping open label extension and expanded access for this regimen. More recently, we announced results for Regimen C, testing CNM AU8. And while the primary endpoint was not met, there was a survival signal. And for this reason, while we are doing additional biomarker and exploratory measure analysis, we are keeping the open label extension and the expanded access protocol open. Next slide. We discussed results for Regimen B and Regimen C during previous weekly webinars. So I would like to suggest that if you have more questions, obviously you can ask them today, but also we have a lot of content that's been recorded and available on the website at the links and QR code that you can see here. Next slide. So again, in terms of what's next, we do have other regimens. Again, Regimen D is ongoing. We don't have the results yet. Regimen E is enrolling new participants now. And so if you're interested in participating, that's available. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And also so that, for the future for 2023, we are actually starting up two new regimens, and we have selected 3 additional regimens. So certainly stay tuned in terms of having more regimens available for people with ALS in 2023. Next slide. Now, let me focus for a second on Regimen E. And the reason I want to talk about it is because that's the one that's enrolling regimens right now, participants right now. So trehalose is also known as SLS-05, and it's manufactured by Silos Therapeutics. It is essentially a sugar, 2 glucose molecules that are not made by humans, but humans can metabolize it. Unfortunately, if you were to take it by mouth, it would be broken down in the gastrointestinal system because in the people, humans have an enzyme that cuts down essentially the molecule. So it has to be administered intravenously in order to bypass the gut system. And also it's been shown that when administered intravenously, again, the drug can bypass the gastrointestinal system and can also penetrate muscle and brain. And importantly for ALS purposes, it was tested in vivo in the SOD1 models of ALS with promising results. Next slide. Happy to take questions about all of this, but I also want to refer you to previous webinars. So if you can go to the next slide, I think we should have the link to previous webinars. They are available on our website. And again, more recently, our colleagues, Dr. Sukovic and Dr. Lada gave a webinar in NEALS that's also available not only on our website, but also on the NEALS website. So I'm sorry for the technical issues, but we will get hopefully to the next slide soon. Yeah, maybe you can. Okay, that's great. So, oops, the previous one. And essentially very quickly we show the QR code and the link. So I don't know if you could get it, but here it is. Perfect. So you can go back to that. That's for the most recent one. We have others also available online. Next slide. So again, just in terms of our enrollment updates, as discussed with many of you, it's really important for us to let you know how we're doing with enrollments. As of right now, almost 150 people have signed informed consent, but as you know, there is also a screening process. Unfortunately, not everyone can be eligible, but we really value everyone who signs informed consents, and hopefully, you know, most of you will be able to participate. Really, every research participant really plays a critical role again in developing treatments for ALS. So thank you to all of you who have signed informed consent, and also to the over 100 individuals who have been randomized within Regimen. And as a reminder, the target sample size is about 160. So we're getting there. We still have spots though. Next slide. So if you're interested in participating, we now have 51 sites compared to last week. I believe we activated one more site in Los Angeles. So again, we continue to add capacity. We want to go to new geographies, obviously, but we also want to increase capacity in big cities. So happy to have another site in Los Angeles. Next slide. Now I want to switch gears for a second and touch on the topic of expanded access, because we've been getting a lot of questions about it. And specifically, I want to talk about it in the context of Regimen E. So while we are trying to do as much as we can to increase access to clinical trials, for example, as just mentioned, we want to expand to new sites, include new geographies, and try to, again, make the trial available as much as possible. Historically, the participation rate of people with ALS in clinical trials has been really low, around 10% historically. We should probably look at more recent data to see if that number is going up a little bit. But if you look, you know, in the history of the last 25 years of ALS clinical trials, unfortunately, participation has been very limited for a number of reasons. Now we're trying to look at different reasons and trying to tackle as many as possible. But one of the reasons for difficulty in participation is difficulty with enrollment criteria. In other words, not everyone who would want to participate is able to do so because the characteristics of their disease are such that they may not be eligible for clinical trials. Now, in the case of the platform trial, we have tried to broaden the inclusion criteria or eligibility criteria. So now we're broader than other trials. That said, even with that change, not everyone is able to participate. So how do we solve that? Well, there are different considerations here, and I'm not trying to sort of address all of them. I'm just going to address one. So one of the possibilities for people who are clearly not eligible for clinical trials due to a number of reasons, for example, very long disease duration or other comorbidities or presence, for example, of things that are exclusionary, lab results or things like that. One option, it's not the only one, but one option is to consider participation in expanded access. So let me tell you about what that is. So if you can go to the next slide, we know that expanded access is actually an FDA mechanism. It's been around for a long time. It's been used extensively in fields like oncology or HIV, can also be called compassionate use. It's a relatively new concept in ALS, even if, again, it's been around both at the FDA and in medicine in general for a long time. There are specific rules about expanded access. So it's available for people with a serious disease or condition and allows access to an investigational product or a drug outside of clinical trials when there are no alternatives. Next slide. And these can be allowed in the context of an individual patient. So an individual patient contacts an individual physician, and these individual expanded access can be requested and oftentimes is granted. Or expanded access can happen for what's called an intermediate sized patient population. Now, there is no specific number. Typically, that means, 50 people, maybe 100 people in that range. Again, there is not a cap or a specific target number, but it's intended for sort of small groups of people that are not eligible for clinical trials. And so the advantage of doing it for an intermediate size population as opposed to an individual patient is that you can essentially request permission to the FDA, and there is also an approval process and some administrative work that goes along with it for a group of people rather than having to do it for each individual person, which would be incredibly burdensome to do sort of, one by one, kind of starting from scratch. There's also the option of larger patient populations. This has not really been done in ALS yet. I think that the largest EAP ever done was the Amylyx one that was up to 250 people. Oftentimes that's for drugs that have been later in development. But intermediate size patient populations is something that companies are becoming more open to. Certainly the FDA mechanism exists. It's more a matter of funding and having the resources for that because of the complexities of sort of the paperwork and administrative burden, which is there. Even if it's sort of, a more flexible system, it still requires a lot of resources. Next slide. So again, the requirements are that people should have in order to be eligible for an expanded access, we're talking about people who have a serious disease when there is no alternative and when the potential benefit justifies the potential risk. Again, the word potential is very important. We do not know that these are treatments. We just know that these are experimental drugs or investigational products that are being tested in a clinical trial, but that particular individual or group of individuals are not eligible for the formal trial. Another important condition is that having an EAP should not interfere with clinical trials. So again, it's not a substitute by any means. It's sort of a supplement for people who cannot access the trials. Next slide. So because of that, we have been running an EAP companion, a companion to the platform trial. We've basically been doing it for over a year for for 3 drugs that were tested in regimens B, C, and D. And I told you earlier that based on the results of the platform trial, regimen B, the expanded access is being stopped. The one for regimen C will continue, and the one for regimen D is still ongoing. Again, we don't have the final results for regimen D, so more to come on that. We are enrolling at 10 sites. So far, we have enrolled a total of 85 participants. So again, in that kind of intermediate size population. All of this is funded by philanthropy, but drug is donated by the manufacturer. So I would like to thank Biohaven, Clean, and Prelenia for doing so. And philanthropy is philanthropy to the Healy Center and really helping us run this program because it does have some administrative, paperwork, and it requires essentially resources to run the program. And we are collecting safety and clinical data and some biomarker data for some of these. If you notice on the map, we selected sites so that they could be geographically dispersed. We didn't want to only have EAPs in one location. Obviously, we're hoping to increase that even further. But again, the site choice was kind of intentional to provide EAPs in different locations. Next slide. And again, this is made possible by community support. Lots of people have been really contributing to this. That's fantastic. So I really want to thank everyone who has been running a number of golf tournaments or different fundraisers, walks, runs. This is really fantastic how everyone came together to support other patients and other people to really make this possible. I also want to highlight Tech versus ALS, which is another fantastic fundraising initiative that has, really encourage you to go to their website, really innovative model to fund EAPs. And in particular, they recently helped support expansion to another site, another one that was not listed on the previous slide. And thanks to their support and interest in the Philadelphia area, we'll be working with the Jefferson site to bring EAPs to Philadelphia as well, and hopefully many more locations. Next slide. Now, what about Act for ALS? I know that many of you have questions about it. So the law was signed on December 23rd, 2021, so about 10 months ago. And it actually has a number of sections. So it's not just about EAPs. EAPs or expanded access are one of the 5 sections, I believe, that are included in the Act. And specifically Section 2 is a program to grant funding to conduct intermediate size EAPs. And so we were really fortunate to receive the first of such awards very recently, at the very end of September. That's the press release that you can see there at the snapshot, September 30th. And because of that, we will be able to do an expanded access protocol for Regimen E, the 5th drug, or Trialos, the one that we just spoke about. We are enrolling new participants in the Regimen E proper in the actual trial, and obviously participants in Regimen E have to be eligible for that. However, if people are not eligible, it is possible again to think about this expanded access for Trialos. Next slide. Now, this is something I want to be very clear. So we are in startup. We literally just received a notice of award 14 days ago. Normally, it takes 6 months to set up a trial. We're trying to go as fast as possible, but certainly we will not be enrolling our first participants until Q1 of 2023. And I cannot tell you exactly if that's going to be January or March. Again, we're trying to do to go as fast as possible, but there are some technical timelines to be able to roll this out to participants. We will be rolling this out to 25 sites. So if you think about our evolution, we were first, doing things as a single center MGH. Now we have had, a good fortune of working with other 10 sites, but now we're expanding to 25. So from an infrastructure perspective, that's, a big jump. So to go to 25 sites. So again, we need to go through all the operations and the startup. Ultimately, this will be for 70 participants. And again, this is NIH funded, and I'm really glad to work with my colleagues, Drs. Babu and Barry, on this. Again, this is happening in parallel to Regimen E, or the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial, and thanks to the drug donation from Silos and the funding from NIH, we will be able to do a little bit more than we were able to do with previous EAPs. We will be able to collect more data, specifically measure neurofilament light levels and look at early signals of efficacy. We're going to do some comparison studies to natural history. There's very complex statistical modeling that goes into this. And again, we're very excited to leverage Act for ALS funds to develop not just yet another EAP, but really to think about how do we best model these for the field? How do we best develop the statistical methods to compare data to natural history? This is not trivial, I would say. So there are really, there's a lot of thought and work that's already going into this to really model these as best as possible so that we can learn from EAPs as much as possible. Next slide, which I think is the next one. So if you can scroll, essentially, again, I want to emphasize that clinical trials are essential to develop new treatments for all people living with ALS. There's no substitute for that. However, EAPs are an FDA mechanism to give access to investigational products to people who are not eligible for clinical trials. We don't know if those drugs work or not, but we're happy to give access to people who are not eligible for the trials. And why do we do that? We do that for access, but we also can do that to supplement the clinical development program of that particular drug. Specifically, we can collect safety, clinical, and biomarker data in broad populations that normally are not included in clinical trials. And this again is a mechanism that's new for ALS. It was used in other areas of medicine. It's new. I think this is really the first time that we're really trying to do something new in terms of EAPs in ALS, trying to do them in parallel to clinical trials. And again, a lot of people are providing input, and we're really trying to do it in a way that that's as efficient as possible and as thoughtful as possible to almost create a blueprint for EAPs and really promote that in parallel to every future, hopefully every future clinical trial, but again, in a way that allows us to also learn and benefit everyone. And I hope that was helpful. I know there's a few questions, and then again, we can take them. Question about the EAP. So the question is, which EAPs are ongoing? So I told you that there is an EAP companion to the platform trial. So in terms of actually regimen A, zilucoplan never started an EAP because it was the policy of the company to not do EAPs at that stage. Regimen B, or the deeper study EAP, is being stopped. That's, I guess, the second regimen, technically speaking. It's letter B, as in Bob. It's the deeper study regimen. Regimen C, let's say the third regimen, it's really not, there's no real numbering, but again, there's more a letter, CNM AU8 is continuing again, because we saw a survival signal, and therefore we are continuing that. Regimen D, as in David, is also continuing. Question about, and regimen E, actually, we're starting it up right now. And so the question about genetics, what we are doing. So we are doing whole genome sequencing, and we're looking essentially at all known mutations for ALS, whatever is available right now. If something else were to be discovered in the future, we will be able to go back. But for now, we're obviously testing all the known mutations and risk factors that are known today. We will not give the results back to the participants. We actually had a discussion about that, and there's a couple of reasons for not returning results. Number one, if you return results, there's a whole sort of process that needs to happen that actually could be incredibly complicated because the labs, we're doing this on a research basis, and when you return results on a clinical basis, there's a whole certification process that needs to happen that we felt would not be actually, you know, helpful to the participants, also because we're not doing it in real time. In other words, many participants, you know, enrolled in the study a while ago, and we're doing the genetics right now. So it wouldn't necessarily be in real time. What's most important, I think, for people who have ALS and want to know about their genetic status, I think it's important that they talk to their physician. Right now, the test is free, and so it should be available to everyone in the clinic without the need for this particular research testing. So a few other questions. In terms of futility checks, so the futility checks have been ongoing. They continue every 3 months, and again, they continue to be performed on a regular basis. And so again, we if a regimen were to be stopped, we would announce it immediately, just like we did for regimen A. So good question about how do we really increase the enrollment of people with ALS in clinical trials, and what percentage is achievable? That's a great question. I don't know what percentage is achievable. Certainly we need to get to do better. I think that there's a number of people are working on this. I mean, EAPs are one way. It's not the only way. There are also other things that can be done and should be done. And actually there's a great foundation, the Tambourine Foundation, that's providing support to us and others to increase inclusion and access and diversity of participants in trials. There's many other groups from IMALS to ALS Association and others who are also working towards that goal. So I think it's not just a matter of eligibility criteria, it's also a matter of barriers such as transportation, etc. So certainly a multi-pronged approach is needed. So in terms of, you know, there's a question about the NIH grant. So essentially, can you ask for funding for only regimen E or other regimens? So so when you apply to the NIH, that's just the way these grants work. When you apply to the NIH, you have to apply for a specific drug. Certainly, we would love to apply for future drugs as well. And the way the NIH works, every year they release a request for application. So certainly I hope that there will be another grant opportunity next year. Examples of biomarkers, well, the biomarkers, certainly we're measuring neurofilament light for everyone, but there's a number of other biomarkers that are being evaluated per regimen. So for example, P75 that has relevance to regimen C, a number of other proteins and markers that depend more on the specific mechanism of the drug. A number of questions about Amylyx or AMX35 and Relyvrio. So again, we have a commitment to allow the people in the trial to be able to take the new drug. Again, we're working out on the logistics and the specific guidelines. I would ask you that you talk to your site because it's a little bit tricky for the current regimens. Certainly for future regimens, there's absolutely no problem in people taking, standard of care drug. And we also already told everyone that people who are in the open label extension can also start Relyvrio or AMX35. For the people who are right now in regimen E, which is in the placebo-controlled period of the trial, it's a little bit tricky because starting Relyvrio would affect potentially the results. So if people can wait until the open label extension, that would be our preference. Again, it's a preference. So again, we haven't issued formal guidance yet because we're still getting a lot of input. We met with all the industry partners. We'll be meeting with patients all along. We have another patient advisory committee next week. So again, we want to make sure that before we issue final guidance, we have input from all stakeholders. Again, the intent is definitely to allow it. I just want to mention that we are really putting a lot of thought into this with input from everyone, also with input from biostatistics, because again, it's also important that we, continue to test these drugs. But again, the intent in the future is to allow the drug. So there's a question about genetic testing. So genetic testing, I should actually thank you for asking me to clarify that. The genetic testing that's available for free right now in the clinic through their doctor is only for known genetic mutations or some of the modifiers like ataxin-2. It's not whole genome sequencing. I should have mentioned that. And the reason for it is because the whole genome sequencing is not necessarily actionable right now for the person in the clinic. Instead, knowing your genetic status for known mutations, things that are known right now, is actionable in the sense that people, for example, people with a SOD1 mutation can apply for expanded access for tofersen. If the drug is approved, they will have access to tofersen, or there are trials that target specific mutations, C9 or FAS, for example. So what's available in the clinic right now for free is a genetic test for known mutations. And also there was a clarifying question about stem cells. So thank you for that. So the stem cells. So as of up to now, we have not collected stem cells from study participants. It's somewhat complicated, expensive, etc. But we certainly want to do it for at least some of the upcoming regimens. So how do you do that? So you can do a blood draw, a simple blood draw, and then you have to process the cells in a certain way. You extract PBMCs, which are essentially a type of blood cells that circulate in the blood. You have to extract them at the site level, and then we can ship them to a lab where they can extract, again, make stem cells out of it that will be personalized, adult personalized stem cells from that particular individual. They can be cryopreserved, which means they can be frozen. And then they can be reactivated in the future to make motor neurons, to basically make personalized motor neurons from that individuals, again, in a dish. And that could be used to test drugs or, again, do more testing on an individualized basis. So certainly something that you want to do for the future. So I see a few more questions. I see here a question about donation, brain donation. The NEALS doesn't have a bank, but there are many other banks. And so please talk to your doctor because there are many programs out there. I see also a question about the Research Ambassador Program being one of the groups that's trying to increase access to trials. Maybe Alison, would you want to tell us more about the Research Ambassador Program if people want to know more about it?
Yes, if anybody would like to know about it, the research ambassadors are the patient advocates in the science community through NEALS, and you can learn more at neals.org website.
Great.
I can drop that in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And actually, I noticed that I skipped one question, so I'll take that. That's the last one I think that we didn't take. So if people have completed one regimen and they want to enroll in a different regimen, can they do that? So the question is, if they're still eligible, yes, they can. Now, the question is, would they be guaranteed drug instead of placebo? Unfortunately, that's not possible because otherwise it would affect the results of the study. The chance of being in a trial like this, where the number of people on placebo is less than the number of people on placebo in other trials, the chance of being randomized twice to placebo is about 6 to 7%. So again, not zero, but it's a low chance. And again, we would love to lower that chance even more in the future, hopefully, as we continue to run more drugs through this platform trial and accumulate a strong placebo bank, as we call it, sort of, a lot of data. Hopefully, we will be able to reduce the ratio further. Great. Thank you so much. Great questions as always. Always great to connect with all of you. And again, we'll see you again next week. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.